The connection between flow and doing things that are seemingly impossible, right? Is flow required to achieve this?
The answer is no, but there's a caveat. That's been the question I've spent 30 years trying to answer. And whenever you see the impossible become possible, you're seeing the intersection of two things. You're seeing somebody figure out how to expand human capability. You can win a single game, championship level game, without flow. You can do it. You can grit it out, you can tough it out, you can play your best. That's the day you're actually looking for. You can't win an NBA championship, but you can win a Super Bowl, right? You can show up for one game and grit it out and just do it, but it's not repeatable and it's exhausting. The list of skills that flow magnifies is extraordinary. When we say peak performance, I don't mean anything fancier than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. What is that biology is essentially the question you asked. Is it just flow? The answer is
what does it take to do the impossible? What does it take to level up your game like never before? What does it take for individuals, organizations, for even institutions to achieve paradigm shifting? Nothing is ever the same again, breakthroughs.
Our mission is to decode the neurobiology of flow and cognitive peak performance. Access the minds of maverick scientists, groundbreaking innovators, and world-leading experts to understand what it takes to achieve ultimate human performance, so you can feel your best, perform your best, and accomplish your boldest goals. I'm your host, Rian Doris, and together with best-selling author Stephen Kotler, I present to you Flow Research Collective Radio.
Today my guest is Stephen Kotler, a New York Times bestselling author, award-winning journalist, and the executive director of the Flow Research Collective. He is one of the world's leading experts on human performance. He is the author of 11 bestsellers out of 14 books, including The Art of Impossible, The Future is Faster Than You Think, Stealing Fire, The Rise of Superman, Bold, and Abundance. His work has been nominated for 2 Pulitzer Prizes, translated into over 50 languages, and has appeared in over 100 publications, including the New York Times Magazine, Wired, Atlantic Monthly, Wall Street Journal, Time, and the Harvard Business Review. What role does technology play in human performance?
It's a great question, and it's sort of my work has focused it as a central question. What does it take to achieve the impossible? That's been the question I've spent 30 years trying to answer. And whenever you see the impossible become possible, okay, slight overstatement. The vast majority of the time when you see the impossible become possible, you're seeing the intersection of two things. You're seeing somebody figure out how to expand human capability. Usually that's going to involve flow and other aspects of sort of cognitive peak performance or just peak performance. You also see people leveraging disruptive technology. So half of my, especially accelerating exponential technology, the ideas that Peter Diamandis and I have written about in Bold, Abundance, and The Future is Faster Than You Think. And in fact, then this was my beat as a journalist. I covered action sports, right? And I covered neuroscience, but I also, my job for like 50 different publications was those moments that sci-fi became some science fact. I was the guy in the room. So how did you ask me off the air how I met Peter Diamandis? Long before the X Prize was anything but like a wild idea in Peter that he had just sort of announced to the world in whispers, I heard about it and I was like, oh my God, somebody's going to build a private spaceship. That's sci-fi. And I wrote the first major story on the X Prize because, and I had like some insider knowledge in a very weird way. And I knew everybody in the world thought the X Prize wasn't going to work. But because of the weird world I had just walked out of, I'd done a very crazy aerospace story and about the guys trying to drive a car through the sound barrier on the face of the earth, right? And I covered this whole story and it was giant competition, huge tech. And my friend was the head engineer for one of the teams. And him and all the other engineers, I used to go drinking with them and they would say the same thing over and over and over and over again. It is harder to drive a car through the sound barrier on Earth than it is to put a rocket into orbit. Over and over. That was their metaphor. I heard it like 50,000 times. And then my next story, I hear about Peter and I go meet Peter. Everybody thinks he's crazy. I call all the aerospace companies, say, this dude is nuts, he can't do it. I call NASA, they're like, oh, he's freaking crazy, don't even talk to him. But I'm literally talked to these top aerospace engineers for a month, and they kept saying, this is harder, and they drove a car through the sound barrier on the surface of the earth. I watched it happen, and I was like, well, if this is harder, somebody's gonna do this. And I believed them. And so when everybody else said Peter's crazy, I went, no, I think he's right. And that I started covering aerospace, and that was, one example. But when the very world's first bionic eye got turned on, the very first blind man who could see again, I was actually in the room, as it got turned on. So over and over and over again, I put myself into this world where sci-fi becomes sci-fact. And you always see the same thing. You're seeing scientists figuring out how to drop into flow and cook up some crazy, use the boost in creativity and motivation that comes from flow to put this into practice. So it was really nicely nestled, especially if you're dealing like with entrepreneurs or innovators, because they're very well versed in flow. Even if they don't have a language for it, they know what they do to drive themselves into flow. So for me, I was learning about the athletics on one side, but I was like this great business study in like entrepreneurs and innovators with crazy ass ideas that nobody believes in, dropping into flow and using the state to kind of like help push their tech along. And it was a really cool journey along the way.
It's absolutely wild, like the connection between flow and doing things that are seemingly impossible, right? So I guess the question is flow required to achieve this?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and there are there's no one answer. So the answer is no, but there's a caveat. So the easiest place to get this particular answer is in professional sports. And if you talk to players and or coaches, they will all say the same thing. You can win a single game, championship level game, without flow. You can do it. You can grit it out. You can tough it out. You can play your best. And in fact, come back to this with me. There's always a day that comes when you have to perform at your best without flow. And from a learning perspective, that's the day you're actually looking for. So we'll come back to that in a second. But the answer to your question with Queen and coaches is you can do it once. You cannot win a 7-game series without flow. In fact, I once wrote a piece. I don't remember where it was for, maybe the Washington Post. And it was me and the former point guard from the University of Rhode Island basketball team. And we were talking about how in the Final Four in basketball, you can't win. You can win one of those games without flow, maybe two. But basketball is a game of my team's in flow. We've knocked the other team out of flow. Oh no, now the other team's in flow. We got to get back in flow. It's literally the cognitive side of basketball is really amazing from that perspective. And so the thinking is, you can't win an NBA championship, but you can win a Super Bowl, right? You can show up for one game and grit it out and just do it, but it's not repeatable and it's exhausting. So anybody who's ever been through that experience, the recovery is like 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 times as long afterwards because it's so grueling. Flow provides, among the things the neurochemicals do, you get a lot of pain relief. So in athletic activities, you're getting really, there are 20 different endorphins in the brain, but the most common endorphin is 100 times more potent than medical morphine. So these are heavy painkillers the brain produces naturally for us. You try doing something very physically challenging with no painkillers in your body. First of all, there's a little trauma there also. In fact, one of the things that's in our country sort of towards the end of the book is a conversation I have with Laird Hamilton, the big wave surfer, about something that I'd never known before, which is that you can get PTSD from success, from physical. Like I was out there doing hard, physically challenging things. I was doing them successfully. I was not crashing. I was pulling them all off. But the cumulative weight of all that fear at a certain point, like of going against, pushing myself through a fear barrier day after day for like 6 months straight, by the end of it, there was like residual trauma. What psychologists talk about is allostatic load or allostatic overload. But I had low-grade PTSD from success, which I didn't even know was possible until I ran this first
And is that because
experiment.
you're operating in flow state all the time, and then the endorphins and the chemicals?
No, it's a lot of it is you're not operating in flow all the time, right?
Understood.
Like,
okay.
You have to go because if you're gonna, I taught myself how to park ski, right? And it took 6 months, probably 5 months. That meant I skied 88 days. So 88 days, I had to show up at the hill knowing I was there to do something that scared me to death and could possibly put me in the hospital. And it didn't matter that my formula was working. I was doing it. I was doing it successfully. I wasn't going to the hospital. I was accomplishing my goals. But it didn't change the fact that confronting fear day after day after day, physical fear, I was not emotionally prepared for. And I think that the same thing is probably true. I think we have the same thing in, say, business challenges. I think part of like leveling up your game, because you can level up your game and then not believe it's real. You know what I mean? You sort of get to that place and you're like, I'm here, but I don't know if I belong here. And sort of like you have this, it's not quite PTSD, but there's a lot more anxiety that starts to hurt your performance based around those sorts of, oh my God, I've got here so quickly. I got lucky. There's no way this shit could be real. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I remember the very first time was in my 30s that I successfully like started adding zeros to my income every month. You know what I mean? Like I was really moving the needle for the very first time. And I like, after like 6 months of it, I was just like, there's no way this shit could be real. I just got lucky. This is not like nothing like this. Guys like me don't make this kind of money. I'm like a punk rock kid from Cleveland. This isn't real. And yeah, that I think it took me like a year and a half to sort of get over that and get back to where I was.
What does that actually do in terms of your ability to go into flow state and or the inner workings of your body when you have that? I guess it's imposter syndrome. It's the best only term that I know to call it.
I want to say you hear a lot about imposter syndrome now in overblown terms. I don't think there's any way you become successful without going through a period. Like you have to keep leveling up. You have to keep punching above your weight class, right? You're like, there's no possible way to do that. If you do that and show up at this new level and like, I belong here, I'm the shit. Like you're a narcissist or an egomaniac and you're going to have those kind of problems. You know what I mean? Imposter syndrome is, I think, the natural way we sort of grow that way, first of all. But the second thing I want to say is there's probably a bunch of cortisol, hormonal, body inflammation, stress stuff that I'm not going to really talk about. I'm going to talk about the impact on a really key structure in the brain, maybe my favorite structure in the brain, the anterior cingulate cortex, very near the center of our brain. And it is the part of the brain that when you're facing a challenge, it makes the determination threat or opportunity. Threat or opportunity. And among is part of that. And what it really does is it says, if you have a lot of fear in the system, it wants you to be logical, linear. It doesn't want to try new things. It doesn't want to be creative. It wants to try something safe and secure. So, and this happens all unconsciously. So the more fear you have in your system, the less creative you're going to be, and the less you'll lose your ability to learn, because norepinephrine, little bit primes you for learning, too much blocks learning almost entirely. So too much fear in the system, long term, it kills all kinds of outside the box, real creative thinking. It also kills squelches your motivation, squelches your energy levels, in the end leads to burnout. But the biggest hit is that when we get freaked out, we lose the ability to think our way out of the situation. Because the part of your brain that can sort of think outside the box and solve problems in a creative way is completely shut down. So for peak performance, I always say there's, on a cognitive side, there's what we call the peak performance basics of the Flow Research Collective. And on the cognitive side, you have to be constantly managing your emotions. So you have to have a daily way of keeping your nervous system in check. And, you know, the standard 3 best are a daily gratitude practice, a daily mindfulness breathwork practice, or regular exercise. And 5 minutes to do a mindfulness practice, 11 minutes to do breath work, and you have to exercise until it gets quiet upstairs and your lungs open up, which is a signal that nitrous oxide has been released and stress hormones have been flushed out of your system. That's usually 20 to 40 minutes depending on your fitness level. And if you work if you work with my company, for example, I ask my employees to do 1 a day for sure, and during stressful times like during COVID, you do 3 a day. Because I need peak performing, fast learning, creative individuals. And I also, from an inverted perspective, one of the things that is very challenging in a business environment, I think, is you don't ever hire one person. You actually hire 2 people. You hire the person they are when they're terrified, and you hire the person they are when everything's great, right? And when they're terrified, that's a very different person. And and then if you're an entrepreneur, if you're an innovative, if you're a creative, if you're in any of those fields where you're going to move fast and things are going to break and there's going to be a lot of pressure, not knowing how a person functions when terrified is stupid. Like you're bringing a time bomb into your organization.
But how do you actually, so
One of the things
going to
that
all the
I
different
like,
topics,
one
but
of the things I
you
like
have
to
find
do,
it.
yeah, when
Yeah.
I hire people, one of the things that I do is I put everybody through a series of tests where basically and one of them is an assignment there's no possible way they can complete. It's not actually physically doable. I know they're going to fail. I want to see how they're going to fail, how they communicate with me when they get scared, when they realize that it's impossible. It's, all those things. I want to see what they're going to do. So that's how I do it. Other people may do it other different ways, but I literally put, people in. And in fact, my CEO of the Flow Research Collective is the only person out of decades of doing this to people. He actually did it. He didn't just come to me and say, "Oh, this is an impossible chip level." He actually completed the goddamn challenge, which
So
is
that's why
I
he's
hired
the
him.
CEO.
I hired him. Yeah, he's the CEO. That's why he's the CEO. Exactly.
That's amazing. Okay, so let's back up a little bit because we're going into some topics, but I need to set primers with people so they understand all the things that we're going to go into as well. So walk back. Where does your story with flow start? Because then.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
This is not a two-part thing. I thought you were doing a two-part thing, so they already knew.
No. So we can, but I
It's
still
totally
wanna
up to you. It's totally up to you. So sorry.
No, you're good. Just give me. I will use the other stuff, but just give
Whatever
me
you
a
want.
walkthrough
Whatever.
of your origin with flow. So where did not
so-
just peak performance with flow in general, and then we can talk about peak performance as well.
So it's sort of a two-part origin story, but the clear origin story is I became a journalist in the 90s, and there were two things I was fascinated with. I was fascinated with how do humans work, and I was really interested in neurobiology. I felt psychology was squishy, it was subjective. It wasn't giving me the answers I wanted, and I found that people who were trying to sort of train themselves or train other people from psychology were making errors. I was interested in neurobiology because it's mechanism, it's reliable, it's repeatable, it shows up in everyone, it's shaped by evolution. And neuroscience in the 90s was really cool because up till then, nobody was focused on big questions. It was what do these cluster of neurons in this portion of the brain do? And it's something in the 90s, emotions. Where are they coming from and how do they work? How does behavior work? How does consciousness work? These are real topics, right as I'm sort of entering the field. And this is the stuff that I'm super curious about. Simultaneously, I'm an action sport athlete. I'm fascinated with action sports. And this is the birth of action sports as a thing. The Gravity Games, the X Games, right? It's a deep punk rock subculture. I'm a punk rocker. I'm an action sport athlete. I fit, right? And I'm covering it and I'm living in these communities. And I knew enough about peak performance through the neuroscience side of my inquiry to know that there's certain things you look for in a community when you're about to see a flowering of peak performance. And in the 90s in action sports, what we saw, it's often referred to as the era of impossible. It's where more impossible feats got accomplished than ever before in history. And it's not just that people were doing the impossible, it's that they were doing the impossible and then people were iterating upon it. 2 days later, 5 days later, right? This thing that had been impossible, believed, untouchable by humans. Somebody does it, and then somebody comes out and builds on it 3 days later, and that was happening in all the action sports: surfing, skiing, rock climbing, snowboarding. It's this great flowering of human potential, unlike almost anything that's ever happened in sports history. And I'm in these communities. I'm living with them. These are my friends, and everybody I knew, they violated all the standard rules of common sense around peak performance. There was nobody had any education. Nobody had any money. They all had shitty childhoods, broken homes, and, horror stories. Huge amounts of risk taking on a daily basis, huge amounts of substance abuse. Normally you put those things in a community together, right? What happens? People die younger, they go to jail. They don't reinvent what's possible for the human species. So what the hell am I looking at? Where is this coming from is part one. And when you start digging under the hood and talking to athletes, you start hearing stories of flow. Now, back in the 90s, when I was starting this work, especially we were just starting to decode the neurobiology of flow, which was my real passion. But we didn't even have one term for it. It was, were you in the zone? Was this runner's high? Are you being unconscious? Are you in the pocket? Nobody knew. Is this a mystical experience, right? The spiritual community has a whole, the Zen Buddhists call it Satori. The Tibetan Buddhists have a different word for it. Rausch is the German term. I mean, literally, there's this, smorgasbord. And even Csikszentmihalyi, the godfather of flow psychology, he starts out calling it the flow experience. It doesn't even get shortened to like flow or, until much later. So like, it's this wild time where we're trying to figure out what the hell we're looking at. What is it? Is it, common in all of us, all that stuff. And that was really where it started. And from that point on, how does this work in the body and the brain, and how do we get more of it? I asked that question first as a journalist, and then I asked it as an author in half a dozen books. And now in my current incarnation, I get to ask it as a scientist, because at the Flow Research Collective, I work with dozens and dozens and dozens of top neuroscientists and psychologists all over the world at top institutions like Stanford and Imperial College London and University of California, San Francisco, and University of California, San Diego, and Davis, etc. And, we do actual, hardcore research into it. And just to give you an idea of where things have gone from like where we started to today, we just published a paper in a really great journal, Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews. And it's a 100-page comprehensive look at what happens in the brain during flow state onset. So we now know exactly what happens step by step, moment by moment, millisecond by millisecond in the brain as we transition into flow. The paper also compares flow, which is an altered state of consciousness, to the psychedelic state, a different kind of altered state. There's some overlap, but a lot of difference, and traumatic stress. Another altered state, some overlap, a lot of difference. And so not only do we have a map of sort of what goes on in the brain and flow, and as we transition into it, we can compare this altered state to other altered states. And so there's a lot to do, but we've gotten a lot firmer on what we're looking at and what we think about when we talk about flow.
And do you feel that flow is the key to performance, especially in like in your new book? You actually speak about, in the later half of someone's life, how to maintain and optimize performance. So in our country, I'd like you to walk through how that came about. But then, is flow the secret to reducing cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, dementia without genetic precursors, even like accelerating in physical tasks? Is there some connection?
Yes.
Or are these two?
So
Okay.
yeah, let me pull back, give you a big picture statement about. We'll just stay on cognitive peak performance for a second, and then let me move into answer your question. Okay. So flow is defined as an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and we perform our best. That is not an understatement, right? The list of skills that flow magnifies is extraordinary. Motivation, productivity, learning, creativity, collaboration, cooperation, empathy, wisdom, happiness, well-being, overall life satisfaction. The reason is quite simply this. When we say peak performance, I don't mean anything fancier than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. What is that biology is essentially the question you asked. Is it just flow? The answer is no, it's not just flow. From a cognitive side, when we're talking about peak performance, there's 4 categories. Inside each of those categories, there's a big long list of skills, but there's a category under the heading of motivation. And this is extrinsic motivation, stuff we'll work hard in the world to get, intrinsic motivation, passion, purpose, autonomy, and goals and grit. So that's all under the heading of motivation. There's a similar subset of stuff under the heading of learning, creativity, and flow. And the way to think about these categories is when you face any challenge, motivation gets you into the game. Learning allows you to keep on playing, continue to play. Creativity allows you to steer. And especially if you're interested in the kind of stuff that the work I do on Impossible, how do you get there? Where is it exactly? Challenges or creative challenges. You need the creativity to steer. And finally, flow, which is optimal performance, is how we hardwire all of these, how we turbo boost all of these results sort of beyond all reasonable expectation. That's on the cognitive side. Now, on the physical side, flow it deadens pain, it amplifies strength, fast twitch muscle response, a couple other things get amplified in flow, so there's a big physical impact as well, but the bigger boost is cognitive. Now, you asked a peak performance aging question. I have been studying peak performance aging for almost as long as I've been studying flow for 2 reasons. One, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is the godfather of flow psychology. Everybody knows, he wrote a book called Flow. What they don't realize is he actually started his career in creativity, and then he he did some flow work, creativity, and he never stopped working on flow, but he went right into adult development. Why? Because flow is the engine for adult development. How do we grow as people? Flow is woven into that equation, so that all of this work sort of sits in the heart of my field. The other thing is, my wife and I, for 20 years now, have done hospice care work for dogs, and we specialize in worst of the worst cases. So if you are a three-legged, one-eyed chihuahua with an abusive past, cancer, heart disease, liver failure, and bad flatulence, you are our dog. And we've developed a very amazing sort of healing methodology. There's a sort of a global movement to double canine lifespan. We are deeply involved in that. There are some people doing really crazy whiz-bang genetic engineering stuff. That's not what we do. We work with evolutionary biology and evolutionary psychology and some flow science. And that's the work we do, but we're very, very successful at it. And it turns out the same stuff that works in dogs also works in humans, and this is very well established as well. But my point is, I've been in this field for a very, very long time. What happened and what is at the center of our country is, for reasons we can get into if you want to go there, but long story short, their traditional story of aging, what I like to call the long, slow rot theory, is that all of our mental and physical skills decline over time and there's nothing we can do to stop the slide. That is the standard theory on aging. And most of us believe either that's true or some version of that is true. And it turns out none of it's actually true. And there's a wild pile of research that starts in the 1990s and goes through now that establishes all of this very, very clearly. So all the stuff we used to think fades away over time, there's nothing we can do about it, we now know that all use it or lose it skills. So on the physical side and on the mental side, if we properly train all of these skills, we can hold on to them and even advance them much later in life than anybody thought possible. Now, you asked a question about flow. So let me talk about...
Now we're tying it all together. I love it.
Yeah, so let me bring it back to your original question. Cognitive decline is a great place to talk about this. So we used to believe cognitive decline is inevitable. We're going to get Alzheimer's, we're going to get dementia, and there's nothing we can do about it. And certain aspects of... So there are certain changes in brain function that do happen, right? Certain things biologically. But it turns out that a lot of things that happen biologically, nobody's actually linked to cognitive decline. So yes, there are changes in brain function. We also, and this is Gene Cohn's work, predominantly the godfather of geriatric psychiatry, and sort of the founder of peak performance aging. He discovered that as we move into our 50s, because of shifts in the brain, we gain access to what I call a suite of cognitive superpowers. Whole new levels of intelligence open up, stuff we could not get access to before, ways of thinking, ways of abstract reasoning, problem solving. You get whole new levels of creativity as well, including divergent thinking. That's the outside the box, really creative stuff that gets amplified. Wisdom, which is a very specific neurobiological trait, also gets amplified, and empathy. So all these things happen. Now, back to the flow thing. If you want to stave off cognitive decline, you need to develop two things: expertise and wisdom. And why is this? It's because the brain continues to produce neurons until we die. In fact, parts of the brain will produce 700 new neurons a day up until very, very late in life. That keeps going if you do all the right stuff. Where those neurons are matter. So a lot of the insults of aging are very local, right? This part of the brain gets weak, right? These kinds of shifts happen, and most of the damage is in the prefrontal cortex. The newest structure from an evolutionary perspective in the brain is where most of the damage takes place. It's the first to erode. Stuff that's older and deep in our brain, that stays there. So how do you preserve the prefrontal cortex? Wisdom and expertise. Wisdom and expertise create very diverse neural networks. They're not localized in one part of the brain. They're all over the brain. So you're birthing a lot of new neurons and you're creating a lot of redundant, diverse networks. And there's crazy studies on this over and over and over. The most famous is probably the Sisters of Notre Dame. And this is one of the places this research started back in the 90s. This is a group of sisters, and they were very interested. First of all, they're very into education. So they like this research, and they were very interested in peak performance aging or successful aging, so they like this research. And it's a very cohesive group, right? They all live the same, they eat the same foods, they do the same thing. So really good for science. And they all donated their brains to science for autopsy after death, so bonus. And they started giving them cognitive tests and physical tests every year for over long stretches of time. And what they started to realize is that sisters were dying, and when they'd autopsy their brain, they would find brains were full of dementia and Alzheimer's, like bang, out was plaques and the brain was totally decayed, and yet during life they showed no symptoms of Alzheimer's and dementia, none, and they were performing on these cognitive tests incredibly well. And this study gets repeated over and over and over again. We see the same thing again and again. But it's when we start to figure out that certain lifestyle things, Sister's got a lot of exercise, so that's the foundation of, oh wait, exercise is neuroprotective against cognitive decline. It starts sort of there, but it's wisdom and expertise that is really what you see more than anything else. The Sisters are deeply committed to lifelong learning. It's baked into what they do in the world. They're teachers, they're educators, and it's how they live. So like they're building up expertise all the time. What's the difference between wisdom and expertise? Wisdom is like, expertise is all the stuff you're learning consciously. I'm reading a book, I'm learning algebra. Wisdom is I'm watching the group and it seems like there's these nonverbal, social dynamics that you're observing, you can't quite name, but you're learning what they are and how to figure them out, and emotional intelligence stuff. That's all the wisdom stuff. And it's different parts of the brain that do it. So those things are neuroprotective against cognitive decline. Here's what matters for flow. When we move into flow, one, learning is massively amplified. U.S. Department of Defense found that soldiers in flow learn 240 to 500% faster than normal. So you get a huge spike in learning, and flow naturally, for neurobiological reasons we can talk about, it expands empathy. Our ability to see things from other people's perspective expands naturally in flow. This is the foundation of like that wisdom we were talking about. So flow amplifies expertise, our ability to get better at things, and is neuroprotective, and it amplifies wisdom. Here's where, let me tie this all together in a bun for you. So when I said earlier, Csikszentmihalyi worked on flow, and it's at the start of the adult development, and flow is how we become adults, it's because when we're in flow, we can only get into flow by using our skills to the utmost. You got to, like, whatever you know, you're going to push on it and push it to the edge of your abilities. You're going to be a little outside your comfort zone, right? What happens when we do that? We grow, we learn, we come back from that more adaptive, more complex, more wisdom, more expertise. So what's interesting is flow is, Csikszentmihalyi seemed to argue that flow is the only driver of adult development. In the end, he came to that conclusion. And I'm not sure I'm going to say it's one of the major drivers of adult development. But what's cool about it is it doesn't only teach us how to become better adults and help us grow up, it actually helps us become great later in life because it protects us against the ravages of age. So that those are, and I can sort of go on and on and on about flow and adult development, but I'm going to shut up now just so I don't talk your head off.
No,
or as my
amazing.
friend Lizzie once said, are you calling me to talk my face off?
You're asking all the right questions.
Known issue.
There's no issue. It may be a known issue, but there's no issue here. So when I'm curious about a couple things now. So first, we spoke about so we have learning and wisdom, which sort of prevent cognitive decline. Plus, there's some physical activity markers and thresholds that you should maintain to also prevent cognitive decline. And I think it's very easy for people to understand, how do I continue to learn? How do I continue to? I'm sure that that if somebody was like, okay, I'm not working anymore, but I can still proactively go.
So okay. So this is really cool because this is right in the heart of our research into flow and trauma and the differences, things like that. And I hinted at a lot of this stuff along the way. So, but I have to start with flow states have triggers. So if you would like more flow in your life, what do? Right? I
was going to ask that, but I also wanted to ask. So maybe I'll tell you what I was curious about, and tell me if it's relevant enough or not. I was going to ask, how do you measure learning, and are there not leading indicators, but activities you can do to progress your wisdom as well? Because you said those are the two most important things.
Okay, so Yes, this is the right. Let me just keep going because I was only going to stay on flow for half a second. Flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow, and the most famous is known as the challenge skills balance. And when I talked about Csikszentmihalyi and adult development, I referenced this is what I was actually talking about. So flow follows focus. it shows up when all of our attention is in the right here, right now. So there are 26 discovered triggers of flow. There are way more, but that's what they do. They drive attention into the now. The most famous is the challenge skills balance. It says we pay the most attention in the now when the challenge of the task at hand slightly exceeds our skill set. So you want to stretch but not snap, right? That's what I was talking about. So nobody's been able to put an exact number on what's the difference between challenge and skills, right? But years ago, Chick sent me a and a Google mathematician came up with 4% as the average number. Now, 4% is a little tricky if you're shy, you're meek, you're timid, you're outside your comfort zone. So 4%, you're already like, I'm a little uncomfortable here, what's going on? But if you're a hard-charging type A type, 4% is problematic because you're like, what the fuck? Like, I want a challenge that's 50% greater. And those what psychologists call high hard goals are great for motivation. Like you get an 11 to 25% boost in motivation for a properly set high hard goal. So it's great. You just have to chunk it down. So what's right in front of you is about 4%. Now, you asked about learning in older adults. Turns out, allostatic load is a concept I mentioned earlier. Allostatic load is literally the impact physiologically and psychologically of all our residual trauma. Like all the shit that beats us up along the way, it impacts our physiology, it impacts our psychology. And what we realized is it impacts the challenge skills balance in older adults. So what is normally 4% shrinks down to about 1%, depending on where you are. So one of the secrets is shrinking challenges even further. So I took on in our country was, could I learn to park ski at age 53? And standard thinking is this is an impossible challenge. You cannot do this at age 53 for all these 17 different biological reasons. And I was saying, oh, wait a minute, based on these studies and all these things, the superpowers of aging, all this stuff that I'm looking at, you guys are wrong, right? But nobody had actually taken these studies out of the lab and into the real world and said, okay, I'm going to put my ass on the line and see what happens. And that's what I did. And I got enormous, amazing results. And one of the things we did is we shrunk the challenge skills balance, and I went 1% at a time instead of 4% at a time, and I went so slowly. It was amazing. Like some of the early days, I walked off the mountain saying that was victory was silly, but it worked remarkably well. And so, and the point I want to make beyond this is, just because I ran this cool experiment with myself doesn't mean a damn thing to anybody else. What matters to other people is, first I had a ski partner, and he was 20 years younger than me, former sponsored athlete who had gotten very, very injured and walked away from the sport, and he decided to come back. He's using my same learning protocol, and it's more than just 1% at a time, like that stuff. There's a little more going on, but he made amazing progress. And so much so that we went back the following season and we took 17 older adults and used the exact same protocol, and snowboarders and skiers, most of them were intermediate level, ages 30 to 68. So big span, but older adults. And we taught them how to park. We used the same protocol and also taught them how to park ski, issues. I'd have to go into the protocol, but then we took it out of park skiing and snowboarding and ran the same experiment with a couple hundred older adults and had them just use it regularly. So my point is, it worked very, very well for large groups of people, right? That's sort of the story told in our country, at least the front end of those experiments. And if you go to narcountry.com, the website for the book, if you click on peak performance aging experiment or NAR country experiment, you can see the video and read the white paper we wrote about the experiment. So you can check it out for yourself. But
I was going to say that probably outlines the protocol that you actually deploy to help people learn new skills that
so what we did is let me just go, because this is useful for people because it helps. One, the protocol was simply this. We took park skiing, which is this hugely complicated, dangerous acrobatic thing. There are only 8 foundational skills in park skiing. Crouching, slashing, grinding, moving your body in a 180, moving your body in a 360, and doing a move called the shifty. And so what we did is we taught people 2 new movements a day. The goal wasn't go into the terrain park and throw tricks. It was go into the terrain park and play with these new body movements. We had an embodied cognitive approach to learning, different learning style. Won't go into that, but literally play with these two movements a day. playing with the new movements will, for reasons we can go into if you want, drop you into flow. And the flow amplifies learning, and you're going to end up learning tricks along the way. How did we measure it? You asked how I measured learning in this experiment. We videotaped everything. So there's a standard way we judge success in free skiing competitions, right? It's a so-called PAVE criteria: progression, amplitude, difficulty, et cetera, et cetera. And we literally had a panel of judges who judged free skiing competitions and other physical things, and we rated them. We gave them we tracked physiological measures and flow measures and a bunch of other stuff like that, but literally we did standard video review of free skiing. And what was cool is, if you just want to talk about learning and progression, we saw a 26.5% increase in learning on all 5 of these criteria from the first training session to the 4th, which is kind of amazing when you're talking about people who had no park skiing experience whatsoever, lots of fear, right? We're just intermediate athletes in the thing. To see a 26.5% increase it's significant. So lots of learning. You asked the second half of your question was, what can you do about wisdom? This is a really easy one. There's 30 years of data on loving kindness meditation, compassion meditation. So it's a very specific kind of focused meditation. This is when Richard Davidson at the University of Wisconsin, my alma mater, go Badgers, teamed up with the Dalai Lama, and they spent 30 years doing research on monks and what goes on in their brains. They were using compassion meditation. So we know so much about this. And just as a side note, of all the things you could do if you're interested in peak performance aging, they recently did a study where they compared loving kindness meditation versus focused meditation, and they looked at, among other things, telomere attrition. So one of the reasons we age, there are 9 known causes of aging. One of them is telomere attrition. What is a telomere? You have a chromosome, right? And it's constantly repeating itself. The chromosome has a cap on the end, like bumpers on a car to protect the chromosome. Those are your telomeres. They, as genes copy themselves, they get smaller and smaller and smaller. And at a certain point, the cell stops functioning, and it either, then you have problems. So they literally found that 6 weeks of loving kindness meditation versus regular focus meditation actually decreases or stops telomere attrition. So not only does this stuff actually help train up wisdom, it trains up telomere attrition. What happens so when you talk about wisdom, when you talk about seeing things from other people's perspectives, that's actually a part of the brain called the temporal parietal junction. It does perspective taking. And it does extreme perspective. So when you have an out-of-body experience, that is the brain's way of giving you a radically new perspective. So why do people have out-of-body experiences? Like, the first one I ever had, I went skydiving, jumped out of a plane, jumped right out of my body. And I was like, well, what the hell is going on? Why? It's literally the temporal parietal junction, which does perspective, both physical and psychological, saying, oh crap, you just jumped out of an airplane, you're gonna die. Let's change your physical perspective radically so maybe you could find a solution that'll keep you alive. That's what's happening when we have out-of-body experiences, or one of the things that's happening. And this is all extremely well documented. In fact, there's a team in Switzerland led by Peter Brugger, I want to say, or Olaf Blanc, I can't remember whose lab it is, where they have a VR simulation that can produce out-of-body experiences in you. So you can have this experience yourself. But we've gotten really good at where they come from and why they happen. But it's the temporal parietal junction going haywire. This is the same part of your brain that does wisdom. And so when you get to walk a mile in somebody else's moccasins, when you start to see things from other people's perspectives, it's the temporal parietal junction getting more active, expanding. When we're in flow, this automatically happens. Our sense of self disappears in flow, right? It's one of the things that defines flow. We know why this happens. It's changes in the prefrontal cortex and certain brain activity that dissolves the network that produces our sense of self. At the same time, the temporal parietal junction, the part of our brain that allows us to see things from other people's perspectives, gets hyperactive. So when we are in flow, why do we gain automatically wisdom and empathy? It's this construct that's teaching the brain to see things from other people's perspectives, which is incredibly, incredibly useful. But it's happening automatically in flow, and it's happening when we do love and kindness meditation. So
This is
both.
fascinating. And go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and just if you've never done love and kindness meditation before, it's a little odd. I was very resistant to it for years. I've meditated for 30 years, but I was like, loving kindness meditation is like praying for somebody else. I don't think this is going to work. Like, really? Are you kidding? Like, I just didn't buy it. But the data got to the point that it got so overwhelming that I was like, Steven, like, you're reading all the studies, you're just being a moron. And when I got into writing about peak performance aging and training people in it, and I needed a tool, I was like, oh my God, it's got to be loving kindness meditation. It's the single most effective thing for it. It calms you down, does all the like, stress release stuff you want. Plus, any kind of meditation amplifies our focus, which will automatically help produce more flow in your life. And you get, telomere attrition and all these other wisdom benefits. So it's really cool. And I like the University of New Hampshire, actually, has, if you go online, they've got a positive psychology department, but they have a loving kindness meditation script online that I like better than first of all, it's neutral, it's non-denominational, it's not spiritual, it's just, and what's cool about loving kindness meditation that I didn't realize is it's so much easier than every other guide you've ever done, because it's a freaking script, and you run the script, and you gotta feel certain things and think a certain way while you're running the script. But when you get lost and your mind wanders, you're like, oh, my mind wandered. I go, where was I in the script? Let me pick up from where I left off. And after 12 minutes, it's freaking done. Like,
but that seems so overly simplified.
It's so simple. In fact, here's the craziest thing. You can do loving kindness meditation effectively while walking your dog or driving a car. Unlike other kinds of meditation, because it's this script and you can sort of have focus. It's really a very, very, very cool tool. It's very, we've gotten a lot of success with it in teaching that. And if you're interested in focus breathing, I still think box breathing is the best thing to learn. Both of which, because they give you a lot of shit to do. And so if you're a lousy meditator, or your focus is hard for you, or this isn't your thing, which I've been meditating for 30 years, but I fall into that category, right? It's not my thing. I just know how great it is for my brain, so I do it every day. But like, it's still not my thing, even after 30 years of it. And I have to tell you, at one point, it was so not my thing that I actually got into a brain scanner, some of the world's leading experts, and I was like, am I doing it right? Just tell me if I'm doing it right. Because my friends are doing it, and they're coming back with like tales of like meeting Norse gods and having this, and I'm just doing this thing. Like, I can shut my brain off, I can stay here, I can focus, I can do it for an hour and a half, I can do all this stuff, but like, really, this is so like I had to have somebody on the outside say, yeah, you're doing it right, your brain is doing what the monks' brains are doing, you just don't have the emotional experience that most people have with it. Which I find funny.
That's amazing. No, I appreciate you going into like such detail on this, because the average person who meditates, I've never heard this level of explanation as to why you should meditate, or why you should even. And by the way, let me
take it one step further for you, because this is another thing most people don't know. If you want creativity can be enhanced by meditation. Only if you're doing open senses, vipassana, or loving kindness meditation. When you're doing a focused meditation, you're actually training your brain to think convergently, to be logical and linear and focus and put ideas together. But open senses is I'm letting all this stuff flow in through my senses, usually an open eye, like it's all coming in, but I'm not judging anything. That actually trains up creativity. So what's cool about meditation work, and this is also on the physical side, we could have the same conversation about like, if you want to preserve certain kinds of cognitive function, is it better to be cardio or weightlifting, or like, it's really specific. That's what's happened over the past 30 years. It's not just like we learned that the old theory about aging, for example, is wrong. It's that we've gotten really prescriptive. And finally, I think the last bit that there's two bits here that are worth saying out loud about peak performance aging. You can pick which way you want to go into. But one, the big levers are cognitive. Most people think the big levers are like pharmaceutical or nutraceutical or doctor prescribed, and they're not. Like, the data is really, really clear. Peak performance aging demands challenging social creative activities way more than it demands a pill or anything you could take. And if your challenging social and creative activity involves, and this, I'm going to use a bunch of big words here that actually mean something specific, dynamic, deliberate play. That's the actual recipe. And if you want to take it one step further, peak performance aging is about challenging creative social activities that demand dynamic, deliberate play in novel outdoor environments. That's the exact formula for peak performance aging. There is not a drug, supplement, or anything near there is the first thing. Second half of that equation, you can choose where we go. We can cover both if you want. Peak performance aging starts young. We can rock till we drop, pretty much. The research is really clear. And interventions at any age really matter. There's really cool data on like what happens when you start training VO2 max in your 80s. Like cool data all the way up. In fact, the biggest lift you can get later in life is if you're totally sedentary couch potato who's totally decaying away, and you literally just, the intervention is, I'm going to start taking the stairs instead of like riding the elevator. Like the little small interventions from totally, that's where you get some of the biggest lift. But the research is really clear. There's a bunch of stuff that you need to do in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s to really thrive in the second half of your life. So the two things, the 2 points I want to make is most people are approaching aging wrong, and peak performance aging starts young. So both are counterintuitive to how we normally think about it, but both are very, very true.
I would even make an argument that most people don't think about it. They don't really think about it especially at a young age. I mean, I don't know when you are conscious of your aging.
What?
But
Yeah.
it's
What?
not 20.
It's
not
no.
30.
It's not 20. Well, we know that mortality. So one of the interesting things that Ernest Becker figured this out back in the 90s. He wrote a very famous book that won the Pulitzer called "The Denial of Death." That says, our fear of mortality is one of the largest drivers of human behavior. And what the research shows is that is true, but awareness of that, depending on your upbringing, of course, and depending on how much death you're around, of course, but it usually comes online in your 40s and your 50s. And so that fear that has been unconscious for most of your life and governing behavior at a deep level becomes much more conscious in your 40s and your 50s. So that's the natural adult development evolution of it. But it seems like you want to start paying attention to it in your 20s. And by the way, oh my God, did I do everything wrong in my now knowing what I know? Oh my God, wow, I probably shouldn't have drank that much booze and done all those drugs. No,
No, I mean it's valid, and I was actually going to ask. I was going to ask about all these external factors on both sides. So the party drugs and the alcohol, how does that impact? But also, what do nootropics and all these other types of things that are pharmaceutical? How do they impact flow state, peak performance?
Here's what broad spectrum answer to that is you could ask the same question about diet also. Everything I'm saying is true on diet. It's true for nutraceuticals, supplements, and most medicines. Everybody's system is individual. There is no one thing that works for everybody. It's a lie. It's just a flat out lie. In fact, there is no one thing that is going to work for you in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. We change too much. It's a living, moving target. So, let's take something that I actually believe in that works, anti-inflammatory. So there are 9 known causes of aging. Inflammation is at the root of all of them. So anything you can do to decrease inflammation is great. Now, there's a ton of anti-inflammatory supplements that are available. Turmeric is one that I like, but they're all very individual, right? But here's the thing. None of them are as effective as petting a dog for 8 minutes a day, or doing 11 minutes of mindfulness, or having a good conversation with your wife or spouse. Literally, you got to compare them against other things. If you're doing them and you're doing all the cognitive stuff and the physical stuff, sure, you're getting an extra micro boost. But everybody's lazy. They don't want to do the cognitive stuff. They don't want to do the physical stuff. They want the pill. And when you look at the pill and actually compare it to other things, look at the comparison studies, it's cuckoo. You wouldn't go for the nutraceuticals. You'd be reaching for the cognitive stuff. In fact, let me give you another example. If you want to peak performance aging, which do you think is more important, that you get rid of your obesity or you have regular social connection?
I would say I would say
Most
social
people
connection.
the social connection is right. Yeah, most people actually say obesity when I've asked that question. You got it right. But most people are like, oh yeah, you can't be
No, I had to
ridiculously
pause for a
overweight.
second because
Yeah.
it does make, you
So
think the weight
let
is
me
going to be
let
a
me
huge.
let me give you
Yeah.
of the like mind body peak performance aging connections. This is a little bit of a tangent, but it's my favorite of the facts, and it's really well established. This work originally comes out of Ellen Langer's lab at Harvard, but it's been worked on by everybody, and it dates back to the 70s. So a positive mindset towards aging. I believe the second half of my life is filled with potential and possibility, and I can do anything. Is so powerful intervention. It will add 7.5 years to your life. This is one of the most well-established facts in peak performance aging. In fact, the first thing you have to change is your mindset. If you can, it tends to be very, very fixed. But like the Ohio study of longitudinal study of aging and retirement started in 1975, went to 1995, tracked over 1,000 people, looked specifically at mindset. This is where that number first shows up. A lot of people are looking at mindset, they're going, oh wow, it has a huge impact on health and longevity and blah, blah, blah. And that was the first time we put a number on it. Similarly, let me actually break into a flow tangent here. Flow is phenomenal for peak performance aging for a lot of other reasons, but I talk about stress relief. So when we move into flow, we get feelings of mastery, right? Because we've talked about skill acquisition, mastery, and control. We don't feel peak performance on the inside. We feel, oh my God, I can control things I can't normally control. Oh, I'm playing basketball and the frickin' hoop looks as big as a hula hoop. Oh, I'm writing and my verbs are doing things my verbs don't normally do, right? Like I'm running a business meeting and fuck, everybody's got great ideas and they're all getting along, right? Like what's going on? That's what happens in flow. I'm in control of things I can't normally control. The two most important feelings as we age are feelings of mastery and control. When we feel mastery and control, these are the two most powerful positive feelings that humans can get. They boost the production of T cells and natural killer cells. T cells fight disease. Natural killer cells fight tumors and sick cells. So what I like to say is flow, because it underpins meaning and happiness and well-being. It's not just how we get a life that's more meaningful. It's how we get a whole lot more life that's more meaningful. So you start stacking these cognitive interventions, mindset, flow, creative, social. Like this is really how you spend. There's some dietary stuff, right? There's really great evidence that says if you eat a cup of nuts a day, you can add an extra 3 years to your life. They don't talk about all the other things you're not supposed to eat, and does this work for everyone, and what kind of nuts exactly, and but like there's stuff on the physical side that will help, but the big interventions are usually these psychological cognitive interventions.
I don't want to interrupt. If
I'm
if you're
done.
still going.
I'm done.
No, okay.
There's a pause. This is the
No,
rare pause in the Stephen Kotler monologue, right? You got to take advantage of this, man. It's got to dive in there. It's your chance to get a word in edgewise.
So the no, I'm taking it all in, and now I'm thinking about all the different parts of my life that are not optimized. I'm pretty sure that's pretty normal when somebody.
Well, by the way,
dives
let me go back into something that I said earlier that's probably worth breaking out, which is dynamic deliberate play. I said,
oh, that's right. Okay,
right. What the hell is that? So
yes,
all of our physical skills are use it or lose it skills. So you have a choice. You can either on a weekly basis, literally on a weekly basis, go out and train strength, and then go out and train stamina, and then go out and train balance and flexibility and agility. Or you can find a single activity that trains all of them. Let me give you an example. Action sports are actually better than regular sports for peak performance aging. We could talk about why, but literally when they stack rank, what are the best sports for, like what should you do to stay young? Number one is tennis. Number two is badminton. The stuff that most people do, like going to the gym or running on a treadmill or even running on the street or riding your bike, actually are way down on the list in terms of their benefits. And dynamic activities, action sports are actually better than things like tennis or badminton or whatever, but they train all of those skills at once. So they're like, at the Flow Research Collective, I always say, everybody we train is super freaking busy. So we want to look for multi-tool solutions, single tools that solve multiple problems at once, right? Action sports or sports like these dynamic activities work the best. What is deliberate play? What does that mean? Everybody's heard of deliberate practice. This is Anders Ericsson's. This is the 10,000 hours of I'm going to do the same thing with slight incremental advancement, and that's how I become an expert. And it is true that is one way to become an expert. It is slow, and it is a lot slower than deliberate play. Deliberate play is literally repetition without repetition. It's repetition with improvisation. So, last time I went off this jump on skis, I threw a 360. This time I'm going to try a nose butter 360, or a repetition doing the same thing, but you're improvising a little bit. Or it could be like, last time I threw a 360, but this time I don't feel that good. I'm not that into it. So I'm actually going to dial it back and throw a 180 or a sliding spin 360 where I never leave the ground, right? It gives you a lot more freedom in there. And play means I don't care about the outcome, right? And a bunch of other things that are really important for emotional management. But if we get it right, learning rates go through the roof, flow goes through the roof, and you're training up all the physical skills in a single swoop that you train for peak performance aging. And because it's dynamic, one of the biggest problems that we have as humans in our bodies as we age is stuff goes wrong. We break things along the way, and when we recover, we compensate, right? Like, you break your left ankle, as you're recovering, your right leg gets stronger, you start to use different muscles in your left ankle over time. And what you don't realize is that's compounding over time, and it's going to start to affect your knee and your hip and your gait and your balance and all that stuff. And the biggest problem is we have two kinds of muscles. We have prime movers, my quads, my chest, and we have our stabilizer muscles. And as we age, your prime movers will take over. They'll start doing all the work, and your stabilizer muscles will start to atrophy. And so you'll go, this is what happens when you start, like, you take up a new sport and suddenly you tear your hip flexor, and you didn't even know you had a hip flexor, let alone, 5 different hip flexor muscles. Or you start lifting heavy, and sure, all your shoulder muscles can handle it, but you tear this like really weird rotator cuff muscle in the middle of your back that you didn't even know you had. What the hell? It's a stabilizer muscle, and it's atrophied. So properly done dynamic deliberate play doesn't allow you to take muscle. You have to have your stabilizer muscles active, otherwise you sort of injure yourself, right? So you end up, one, you expose some weaknesses, which are always great because train them up, and two, it's sort of like one-stop shopping for a lot of the problems you get as an older adult. And let me add the final thing I said here. Why are action sports so much better than like badminton or tennis?
That was going to be my next question.
One of the main reasons is this. So I mentioned earlier that neurogenesis, birth of new neurons, right? You want to preserve brain health, that matters. Where do most of the neurons that get born in the adult brain come from? The hippocampus. What is the hippocampus? It's a Latin word for the seahorse, so it's a little part of the brain that's shaped like a seahorse. And it's deep in your temporal lobe, and it's the part of your brain that, one, it does most long-term memories are created there. They move elsewhere in the brain, but they're created there. But what kind of memories are really created there? Location. The hippocampus does place, it does location, it does where. It is, from an evolutionary perspective, you got to remember where you were when critical stuff happened, right? So the hippocampus is packed with what are called grid cells or place cells, things that help us remember where we are when things happen. So what is the best way to birth new neurons in the hippocampus? It's to use it for what it was designed to do, to have novel emotional experiences in the outdoors. That's what it was designed to do from an evolutionary perspective. What happens when we're doing action sports? You're skiing or you're riding a mountain bike or et cetera, et cetera. You're having novel emotional experiences in the outdoors. You're using your brain exactly the way it was designed to use. So what happens is not only do you get more neurogenesis, it doesn't just like give you the standard, you get more, and you get to hold on to other neurons that would be dying off from far longer. So it sounds crazy until you start looking at it from those perspectives. And by the way, this is not news to anybody. The longest lived community in America, Summit County, Colorado, home to Vail, Beaver Creek, Aspen, outdoor lovers. 2 and 3 are Pitkin and Eagle. also in Colorado. They're all like meccas of action sports. So there are some other longer lived communities in America, and they live longer reasons. There's a Loma Linda, California community that's a Blue Zone community, and it's a Seventh-day Adventist community, and certain dietary things and social things and creative that they do actually works. But it's California. It's a surf community, a biking community, take your pick community. So you see a lot of very, very long-lived people in these communities. In fact, that was one of the things that happened to me that led to our country. I called it, I had a name for it. I called it getting geezered. And it was this really weird experience. I was living in New Mexico, and I would ski at either the Santa Fe ski area or Taos. And then I would come every spring, since I lived in Squaw Valley, which is now Palisades, Tahoe, in the early 90s, I come back to that area for May. So I've been doing this for years. So I would ski, and the Santa Fe ski area is this like little ski area that's directly above Santa Fe, which is predominantly a retirement community. Taos is a ski area that like you go to if you're a really hardcore outdoor athlete. It's a gnarly ski area, and people there are outdoor athletes. Squaw Valley you go to if you're an action sports athlete. And what would happen is I'd go to the Santa Fe ski area. Nobody could see how old you are in a chairlift. You got a helmet and goggles and a mask, and I'd be talking to people who were clearly 20 years younger than me or 30 years younger than me. I'd be like, hey, did you ski the bumps over there? You checked out this cliff, or what's the park like? And I kept getting, I don't do that. I'm too old for that shit. My knees stopped it, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh my God, everywhere I went, I was like, holy shit, all these people are dead before they're dead. What's going on? Yeah. And the reason it caught my attention is I'd go to Taos. The age bracket of the skiers has not changed. It's the same group of people. In Taos, they're outdoor athletes. They're charging. So all these people are like, I have hiked Kachina Peak 11 times today and skied these gnarly big mountain lines. And then I'd be like, oh, have you gone into the terrain park? Oh no, I'm too old for that shit, but I will ski, right? And I was like, I don't get what's going on, right? Like, and then I would go to Tahoe, and they'd be action sport athletes, and I'd be with a group of professional athletes who'd be chasing each other around the mountain terrain park. And invariably, the guy leading the charge was my friend Tom Day, who is 60-some years old, right? Like, so like there's a troop of like 30 professional athletes in a line, and the guy at the front of the line is the oldest dude out there. And they all think of themselves as action sport athletes, and they're doing everything, off jumps. And what I started to realize is this is a mindset. There's no difference between any of these people but their mindset. Santa Fe, they think of themselves as retirees, so they act like retirees. You go to Taos, they think of themselves as outdoor athletes, but they can't do the acrobatic, flipping, spinning stuff, but like they can still charge into their 80s. I'll go to Taos and I'll get hiked into the ground. Like hiked and skied into the ground by guys in their 70s. They literally, like, I remember a day where I got so tired that we skied a line. To enter it, you had to go around like this 80-foot cliff, and I was so tired, my vision wobbled as I made the move, and I almost went over the cliff. And the guy I was following I was 40-something at the time. I was following a 66-year-old guy, and he was fine. He had been hiking with me all day, and I was like, what the hell is going on? So it's constantly seeing that stuff up close that makes you go, that was what sort of started leading me towards this stuff, where I was like, something's wrong. Like whatever we think about like aging, it doesn't look right. Like when you get into these worlds, it doesn't look right. The stories people are telling isn't matching the reality or the data when I actually started running experiments.
Can I ask one question just on like physical, because we've spoken a lot about like cognitive and mental aging, but then we sort of dovetailed into physical. But the one thing that I have a question about physical, what about like even hormone levels that change over time and these types of things that the person thinks have a big impact?
So it's interesting. Hormone levels may be less of a problem than neurochemical levels, actually.
Okay.
So dopamine, serotonin, and a couple of the neurochemicals decline over time. That is true. And so what they're finding, and this is where pharmacology gets interesting, what they're actually finding is SSRIs, which are actually terrible for depression, right? They're like a hammer for depression. They work occasionally for certain people really well, but most people, they don't work really well. But it turns out for peak performance aging, they're phenomenal. And the reason is, if you want to treat depression, you may want to increase serotonin levels, but you want to do it in very specific parts of the brain. I give you an SSRI, it increases serotonin everywhere in the brain. Turns out, as we age, serotonin levels drop overall. So increasing it everywhere in the brain really works well. So a little bit, tiny little bit of SSRIs this is at the cutting edge of peak performance aging. The thing I want to say about the physical side and the hormonal side and regenerative medicine is actually starting to get ready for prime time. I've been working with it and studying it and writing about it, reporting on it for 20 years. And it's been a lie in it.
For the layman, what that means. What is
so regenerative medicine is the regrowth of bones, tissues, organs, tendons, right? It's using stem cells and those kinds of tools to rebuild our body from the inside out. That's what regenerative medicine is. Back in the 90s, when the field gets started, it's hormone replacement therapy. It's testosterone and androlone and all that stuff.
People,
right. So that's
old
that.
Men, TRT, old men.
So that's generation one. Generation two is PRP, platelet, plasma-rich platelet therapy, right? Which is essentially a crude way to get at stem cells. And now stem cells are kind of a wobbly tool, but exosomes and placental matrix. Exosomes are literally what stem cells produce. They're very safe. They stay in place. All the problems with stem cells are not associated with exosomes. The problem with exosomes is they're very expensive. And here's the thing about regenerative medicine that people have to know. This is the thing about all the longevity science stuff. And anybody tells you different, they're selling you something, and be very cautious. We have gotten to the point that we are very good at ligaments and tendons, and we're starting to get better at bones, right? We are not yet at organ replacement. We are not yet at cancer, heart disease. We're getting there, right? And it's starting to happen, but like the physical, the bones, the ligaments, the tendons, I got a physical, like we're getting better at that stuff in a lot of interesting ways. Beyond that, the rate of change and the rate of development, the rate of growth is amazing. And I'm not saying I don't experiment out beyond that. I do, but I'm experimenting with my body and experimenting with my health, and I'm just checking stuff out to see what works and what doesn't. And I don't mind doing that, and I don't mind the risk, but not for everyone. And that's the other thing you hear in the longevity science community. You hear all these very hyped up promises about stuff. And I think you should absolutely play with it, experiment with it, try it, run the study if you want, if you're wired that way. But know that this is where the science is really at bones and tendons and ligaments. And bones are we are literally, I broke my back a year and a half ago, not actually park skiing. I broke it training over the summer, skateboarding and weightlifting, and I was being stupid. And I used stem cells and peptides and a bunch of other kind of physical tools. And it took about a year and a half. But you can now, I broke my back. That used to be you're not ever coming back from this. And I came back and I'm now lifting more than I did before my back break, all that stuff. I'm totally back. And it was very expensive, and that sort of stuff. The good news is when I first, 10 years ago, when you were getting platelet PRP, it was like a $10,000 to $20,000 procedure unless you were in New Mexico. That's a legal law thing. Don't ask, or you can ask, but it doesn't matter. Now my mom just had it for her shoulder. She's in her 80s, and her insurance covered it. So cutting edge, 2015 is now Medicare, Medicaid.
Mm-hmm. And are there, you speak about using this to fix your back, and now that it's advanced to the level where you can actually use peptides and other things. But this is what bodybuilders abuse, right? It's all these other types of chemicals.
So yeah, I will tell you before you say bodybuilders abuse it, take my name and type Stephen Kotler, Sympathy for the Devil into Google, or pick up my book Tomorrowland. The subtitle of that article is Why Everything You Know About Steroids is Wrong. So
curious.
Yeah. So let me just. Here's the story. It's early 2000 or 2001, and my editor at the LA Weekly calls me up and he says, "Dude, Jose Canseco just published this book, and he said steroids are the wonder drug of tomorrow. You got to do a story on this. You're up your alley." And I was like, "Dude, I was like, everybody knows. I've been a weightlifter already by that point for about 10 years. I was like, everybody knows steroids are bad for you. And on top of it, I fucking hate baseball. Don't give me this story. Like, nothing could be worse for me. Like, this is not my sport. These guys are wrong, blah, blah, blah. And he said those magic words. I'll pay you to do the research. And I was like, okay, I'm all in, right? So I spend 3 to 4 months in that world at the front end, and like, it's a funhouse because everything I thought I knew about steroids was wrong. Like, every bit of information that I had been told about steroids was wrong. Now, that said, including, by the way, like long-term studies of problems in chronic bodybuilder. You know what I mean? Like, there were all these, when they finally actually went and did the studies, they find a lot less of the negative stuff than most people think. Now, I'm thinking
enlarged organs, liver.
So, yeah, though most of those, the liver. So the liver, for example, this is great. Liver is great. Liver is a great example because it's been so long ago that this isn't what our country is about, and this isn't my area anymore. But liver, you have time to hit on the one thing that I remember. So,
I want to tell just the reason why I think it's interesting is because if somebody's trying to have a better life in the back half of their life, after 50,
and by the way,
thinking about all this stuff.
And by the way, I'm not saying don't get your testosterone tested and improve your testosterone levels. That can make a huge difference for some people, and there's literally nothing wrong with it. What I will tell you is somebody who spent 3 years experimenting with testosterone and growth hormone and all that side of it is you're not going to get the effects you think you're going to get. You're going to get most of those hormones actually help you recover faster. They don't actually do much for strength or the things you think they're going to do. Now, if you want to start stacking androgens, you can get to Arnold. But my point is, the stuff is effective. It's just not as effective as a bunch of other stuff, right? You can play there. My problem is like everybody spends all their time there. They spend all their money there. They're going looking for the magic pill. And the stuff we can do cognitively and physically is a much bigger lever, is my point here. But the liver point is that wasn't actually about the steroids. That was about, there was an oral coating. It was one of the steroids they were taking orally, and they had to coat it in something to get it to steroids to pass through the stomach so they could actually get into your system. And the coating actually was terrible for your liver. And that was the problem. That was where the liver thing was coming from. There are other issues. And your genitalia is going to shrink. You're going to develop breasts. You know what I mean? Like, those things are going to happen. They stop happening the minute you stop taking, huge bodybuilding doses, and they're not going to happen if you take low doses at all. In fact, there's almost no side effects from the low dose stuff. But like, I didn't find them miracle. I didn't find more energy. I didn't find more strength. I didn't ultimately I was like, what am I doing here? Like compared to other interventions, this is a waste of time was ultimately my feeling. But I will also say I think everybody's very individual with that stuff. So this is what I mean with like, there's no one size fits all. And if you go down this rabbit hole, it's a long, deep rabbit hole for maybe you're going to get it right. Maybe you're going to figure out what the exact cocktail is for your body at this particular moment in time, but you're missing the easy, big levers that are available to all of us.
I love it. Okay. This was amazing. I really appreciate you, Stephen. Like, this was a great talk. We could do more, but I'm going to cap this one. And then I'm gonna do more in the future with you because we only went into a lot of topics, but very, 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 very isolated, subject. This applies to a certain group of people, but there's so many other like communities that we could talk about the lessons that you've uncovered over your career. Like, we're talking about an aging population, but I would love to talk about athletes, academics, like executives, like decision making, and like all these.
Yeah, Scott.
Yeah.
You know how to read. You clearly at this point know how to get in touch with my people. So let me get through like the next 6 months of I'm talking about in our country for a living.
Yeah.
And then I'm more than happy to come on and just talk sort of general peak performance. And two things. One thing, why don't I leave everybody with one gift, which is we've been talking about flow, peak performance. You may want more flow in your life. So free gift for everybody. There are 6 known major blockers of flow, things that like we're all prey to. And I got so tired of talking about them that we just built a giant disc diagnostic. So if you go to www.flowblocker.com, it's a free diagnostic. Anybody can take it, and we will email you your results with a very detailed step-by-step. Here's your issue. And by the way, what I have discovered personally is most of us, we got one big one, and then there's like a second one. So I would tell you, like, take it, work on the big thing, and then come back like a month later, take it again. Because usually I find that like we've got like, this is our primary thing that we're screwing up on. And then once we get that fixed, there's like a secondary one that's sort of like buried under the hood that is now kicking us in the ass. So I found that a lot, true in my life also. So, but that's, if you want more flow in your life, if you want to learn more about the Flow Research Collective, flowblocker.com will get you that study, or flowresearchcollective.com will, there's so many free videos, you know, and training stuff, and take your pick.
Good. No, amazing. I appreciate it. Okay. Where do people go to get in our country? Website? When's the
so you can get it. Too. Yeah, you can get it anywhere, but go to www.narcountry, NAR, GNAR country, NAR short for gnarly, right? I don't know if let me give you 30 seconds on where the title comes from, because you'll laugh.
I was actually just going to ask.
Last question. Because I forget. Yeah. So NAR is action sports slang for gnarly. It's short for gnarly. Most people don't realize they may have seen Fast Times at Ridgemont High, gnarly brah. They don't realize that action sports athletes, as a general rule, despite the crazy, wild, colorful slang, are very, very literal. They're really literal people. And gnarly or NAR means a very specific thing. It means high in perceived risk and high in actual risk. So country is any territory, landscape, or terrain. So NAR country is both a really great description of our later years, high in perceived risk, high in actual risk, and as it turns out, what should be clear from this discussion, a really killer description of the gritty mindset you need to thrive during those later years. So it's actually a very specific thing. So narcountry.com, we have, I think it's $1,750 worth of free and very amazing peak performance training bonuses. You get, if you pre-order the book, you help me out, you help me make the bestseller list, and as a way of saying thank you, there's really an amazing suite of training tools there for everybody.
Yeah, I was checking it out before we hopped on, and it's significant.
Right. I always like to say that, like, I hate marketing. Really makes my skin crawl. So I combat it by, like, I just want to tell you about the thing that I'm trying to pimp, and then I want to make it really. Then I want to make it really easy. Like, I want to do good things for you along the way and tell you about those, and then get out of the way. Like, I've done my part.
That is the best marketing. That's
right.
the best marketing.
I can't hard sell marketing. I'm just wired. I'm allergic to it. If I walk into a clothing store or a sporting goods store and somebody's salesperson is in my face, can I help you? I turn around and leave. I literally no, you can't freaking help me. You can leave me alone. You could go away and not sell me anything. I'm an old school punk rocker. We hate being sold.
I agree. I 100% agree. What socials do you want to drop?
Instagram is a ton of fun for me. And we drop a lot of great peak performance stuff on Instagram. So that's probably the best place to follow me. And StephenKotler.com is also the place to get me. And okay, so let me give you the proper Instagram is @StephenKotler.
Okay, perfect.
As well.
I just had to double check too. And then last question I ask everyone, and next time you come on, I'll ask you the same thing. So you've had an incredible career, obviously written many books. I mean, you've been successful in a significant amount of different things. I'm not going to itemize your entire resume here, but the point is, after all of this, at this stage in your life, what does success mean to you?
That's interesting. What does success mean to me? That's, I don't, what success really means to me is that I am living with passion and purpose and flow. And, I am doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing and nothing else. I don't think of everything else. This is the difference between, I always say, how do you know a real creative versus, somebody who's sort of writing a book for other reasons? And there are lots of reasons to write a book, but how do you tell apart? And creatives are always about the next creative. I'm not about the creativity. I'm about I want to be writing the book. So now that the book is coming out, I don't whatever happens to NARC, I'll show up, I'll talk to you about it. I'm excited about it and I'll do the work. But what happens in the world is none of my business. That doesn't involve me. I'm about the creative project. I'm about that. So my success is that I'm moving from really interesting and moving and powerful project one after another. I like the fact I set really, really high standards for achievement, because I don't think, if you're not aiming to be best in the world at something, what are you doing? If I'm going to do something, I want to be the best in the world at it. So I may never get there. I always tell people I want to be the greatest writer in the history of the universe. Now, I don't think that's actually a thing, but it doesn't change the fact that I want to be the greatest writer in the history of the universe, right? If there's a secret galactic award for that, I'd like it.
I got it. No, that's perfect. That's perfect. Okay, so that's how I close them out. So
yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna think about it. But I have to say that I've been on every time I'm on with Mike Gervais, he asks me what I think mastery is, and I've gotten a very good definite. The first time he answered it, I flubbed it like I just did with you, and now this thing is gonna eat at me. What do I actually mean by success? It's gonna eat at me. You're gonna get a book is gonna come out of it. No, it's gonna change, but so next time you ask me, I'll have a better answer.
If what you've heard on Flow Research Collective Radio has been helpful, please consider doing us a solid and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this. Reviews help us connect to a wider audience so we can get these peak performance principles out to more people.